What is up, everybody? This is Marshall Lee of Donkey Job Projects, and this is the early bird podcast. I don't even know what my own show is called, the Artcast, Early Bird Artcast. And today we're going to be talking about public domain comics, public domain characters, all that kind of stuff, and we'll probably take a little dip into Creative Commons as well, because it's all kind of related. And right at the front of the show, let's just say, none of us are lawyers, because this is definitely does have to do with legal stuff. None of us are lawyers. We're just talking about our experiences. And if you need any, if you want to pursue anything with any of this, definitely seek your own legal advice. And that being said, today I have Shel Presto and Mike DiBaggio here today. How are you guys doing today?
Great.
Yep.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, absolutely. And you guys have a Kickstarter going on right now. Do you want to talk a little bit about that real quick before we get started?
You go for it, Mike.
I was going to say you should do it, but we're putting out a new zine, a zine. I don't know whether you guys know what a zine is. So basically, we're doing it on the cheap side. This is the cheapest, quickest book we've ever put out, but it's for the heroic adventure genre. So it's both a literary zine and a for tabletop role playing games. It's based in our Ascension Epoch universe. So it's for like superhero pulp action and adventure games. And but basically it's professional quality in the sense that, we use the normal layout and the artwork is great in it, and it's our normal writing, but then we print it out and just staple it and mail it to you in the snail mail.
I was going to say, since Mike is a wordsmith only, and he doesn't do illustrations, he knows what a mini comic is, but it's essentially a mini comic of the wordsmithing variety with illustrations, because mini comic is the same in that although it's usually fewer pages stapled together on photocopy paper.
Yeah, and I would say mini comic is more emphasis on the comic than the writing, I guess. So yeah, that's awesome, and it features your kind of your universe, correct? The Ascension Epoch and all that. Okay, so you're gonna get some cool stories in there, and also a little bit of art from a friend of ours, Mr. Kim Holm, who's also been on this show and also on Shel's channel as well. So that's pretty cool. And I think that has to do with the topic, actually, which is the public domain, because our friend Kim Holm also releases all of his stuff, I think, under Creative Commons, which is really cool, really interesting. And we're going to get into some of that. So first of all, I wanted to talk about basically, when I go through your website, it says that you release a lot of stuff, or maybe all of your stuff, under Creative Commons, and you work with public domain properties, which, for me, my experience with public domain it's always been, kind of this gradual awareness of the existence of public domain and how it works. And I think I've researched it more within the last few years compared to, my whole life. And it's really interesting. And, you can see a lot of examples, especially if you look at just simply looking at Disney, where, they kind of started off, they kind of created their whole empire, off of the basis of public domain stories. And then it's kind of interesting how they end up becoming the owners of all kinds of different copyrights. And it's like a little bit, maybe some would say hypocritical, I don't know, but it's just interesting to kind of watch how that all developed. But at the same time, another really cool thing is a lot of us comic creators have come to the realization that there is a lot of public domain characters in the comic book realm. And some of us have stumbled onto websites like Comic Book Plus and other ones, and been able to see the gold mine of all the cool things that are actually in the public domain. There's even been rumors at times that Superman and Batman are going to be in the public domain, but I think the powers that be might have something else to say about that. But that being said, what was your interest initially in kind of getting involved with playing around with public domain characters in your own work?
I guess first I would like to just explain to the total newbies to this that the public domain is anything that's not under copyright. So it's stuff that's existed before, not created by you. Could be, technically it includes everything from like folklore, religion, and history, but also stuff that was published under copyright and has since lapsed from copyright. But I guess we started. I was aware of it because back in high school, I was assigned to read some 19th century literature, and I didn't want to buy the book. And I found Project Gutenberg, and it was available to read on there. And I guess I wasn't deep into the subject of like copyright and all this stuff all the time, so I started reading. But then I found more interesting things than Wuthering Heights on there. I found like Edgar Rice Burroughs stories, the Lost Continent, and the Barsoom stories, and I was just reading them in my web browser. Later on, I got exposed to a lot of other things I didn't even know existed, like through the Forgotten Futures role playing game set, which were adaptations of public domain sources like Rudyard Kipling's ABC, the Aerial Border Control stories, and the Professor Challenger stuff. Of course, I knew about Sherlock Holmes, but I didn't know about that Conan Doyle wrote, so many this huge amount of excellent short stories that have nothing to do with Holmes, things like that. And the more I read them, the more I liked them. And then I guess a few years later, I had heard the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen movie was coming out in like 9 months or so, and they re-released the trade paperbacks, and I read them. And I thought, boy, that's really cool, because they're you have all these heroic action heroes, from not all heroic, I guess, but a lot of them are anti-heroes, but and as Alan Moore evidently thought, they were like there were superheroes before superheroes, and we could make a universe out of that. So I don't want to frighten people off too much by saying that I was inspired by the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, because it gets a little weird. But that was that whole line of things was my first inkling of that this whole collection existed, of characters, of concepts, of settings that you could use, and why not build upon them, because they are, if you remember them, for the most part, they're excellent stories. They've had a huge impact on the science fiction genre, of the adventure genre, and people remember them. People remember the characters. So you immediately have this touchstone now that you can interact with readers with, like that you don't have, frankly, if you have a completely original character. Now we have tons of original characters, and I'd say most of our setting is original, but it's built on this. But we can always refer back. It's like, the War of the Worlds, 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. You've seen the movies at least, or if you haven't read the book, and so you instantly have this thing that others can latch onto and say, "Oh, okay, I get it now."
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, and it's kind of cool too. I feel like there's a little bit of the attraction of wanting to work with public domain as well is it's almost like you get to play with pieces of history and also just the research of it, is it's just intriguing to kind of find yourself kind of lost in that world, of older times and stuff. Um, I'm curious, I guess, what, sorry, I'm trying to think like there's like probably you were talking about like the whole thing of like originality and how to get the fact that you still actually have a lot of original characters. So like I feel like there would be like that kind of comment from the readership maybe of you're working with stuff that's already created, that's not original and stuff. Like what would you say to that? Do you feel like that this kind of sparks originality, or is it, are those what do you think about like kind of those criticisms sometimes that might come up with that?
I want to jump in here and say that I think one of the really interesting things, and I'm going to say about the Ascension Epoch, our own stuff, and the thing that really struck me, I guess I'll get into for a second how I became aware of the public domain.
Yeah, sure.
And that's when I was young. Obviously, I liked comics, and I would, look at Marvel and DC, and it was like, well, why don't they cross over? And it's obviously because they're two different companies, and they not every superhero is owned by both companies. One set owns one and one set owns the other. So when it got into things like crossovers, and I started to understand that companies own things, and then you also look at things like I was really, really big into Grimm's fairy tales when I was like 6 or 7. And then, the Little Mermaid starts coming out, and then you see Little Mermaid on the store shelves. You always see like the one that's available for $5 when the real Little Mermaid is $20, and it's a bad drawing, or maybe it's like an imported Japanese thing you've never heard of that they dubbed.
Yeah.
And it's like, how does this exist? And you find out that all those Grimm's fairy tales are in the public domain. Anyone can make one. It's just, do you own the trademarked The Little Mermaid, which you can't actually. You can call it The Little Mermaid as far as I know, but I'm not a lawyer, so look it up. So I became aware of that when I was really young, but you always think like, oh, it would be neat to cross things over, but then you don't. And when I met Mike, Mike was crossing over public domain stuff. And when you start doing that, you have to start bridging gaps. So like Wizard of Oz and War of the Worlds and 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea all exist together in the Ascension Epoch. And it's like, well, how does that work? Because you actually have to start making characters to bridge the gaps. You start seeing where Signalman, who's like our best character in the Martian War, comes about because we needed a hero because the world is invaded with aliens. So as you start especially piecing them together, or even thinking about how would this play out differently, because a lot of the public domain works are like one piece standalone works. Even just saying like, why did the War of the Worlds only last a couple weeks? Wars usually last years. You invite yourself to start creating more and thinking about more situations.
Yeah, I definitely want to emphasize what Shell said there about trying to integrate. When you integrate stuff from different writers, different universes together, you sort of have to get creative if you want to make sense of it. If you don't want to make sense of it, you want to do the Alan Moore route where everything's kind of just thrown together and it's taken for a laugh. Like in many parts of League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, you don't have to think about it too much. But I'm a world builder, and if anything, even more than writing stories or creating characters, I like making a cohesive world. We have this alternate history that weaves real events and events that might have happened but didn't with these fictional stories and brings them together. And that requires a ton of extra invention on your part. and taking bits from this story and that story and the other story and seeing where they have commonalities, where they could fit together, and how to retell it. So like anything, like any sort of stepping back from the public domain just a little bit, like any kind of creative effort, sometimes it helps your creativity if you draw a box around it. You have to have some kind of constraints, right? If you don't have any constraints at all, you sit there staring at the screen, at the paper, at the blank paper, you know, your mind's too full of ideas, right? So I think referring back to something that either you've created before, or a specific idea you have, or in this case, some books or characters that other people have created before. And this is true whether you use, you know, the public domain as a whole, or, you know, a specific book. Say, like, I want to write a Peter Pan or a Wizard of Oz thing, right? You at least you have this basis, this the wild world that's all chaos becomes a more orderly sandbox that you can actually build something out of, and without struggling. So I think it is what you make of it. But even if you're telling new stories, if you're putting some new twists on characters, you're expanding a bit on stuff that came before, you're still being creative. I'm not obsessed with this idea of, what you're doing is not new. I don't buy that at all. I don't think that is. I don't think that's valid. I think that's a lot of people today are obsessed with. I think Americans in particular are obsessed with novelty. They have this idea that, like originality and uniqueness. But the truth is, you don't really, the latest, the most recent original idea was probably from 5,000-6,000 years ago. I mean, it says this in the Bible. It says there's nothing new under the sun, right? And this is written, and this is in the book of Ecclesiastes. So this is what, 2,500 years ago. Right. If they were saying it back then, we don't have a chance of doing that now. Yep. So, you know, you always see predecessors in this stuff that even if what you've done is technically new, we've seen these stories before. And I think that it's important. It's not something to shy away from. It's something that is actually that we should seek, because the reason why we've seen these stories before, these themes, is because they resonate with humanity, with every individual. They have some common experiences. They have these common cultural touchstones they can rely on, and that could only be a good thing.
Yeah.
I was going to say, it's also worth noting too, that, like, you know, everyone jumps on every new Sherlock Holmes thing because Sherlock Holmes is a really good story. Yep. And really like a set of stories and really good characters. So Hollywood knows if you slap Sherlock Holmes' name on it and make it good, people are going to look. And, you know, the biggest hurdle for indie creators is getting people to look at your stuff. Like, your stuff could be the greatest thing in the whole wide world, but if you can't get people to look at it, you're stuck. You're not going to go anywhere. So the public domain really opens doors for you that way too. Yeah,
there's a huge, as I think everybody watching this channel, everybody who's ever done their own thing knows, it's hard to get eyes on something that's brand new. So any little extra tool in your arsenal that you have to make that more relatable, more interesting, more accessible to people, because, you know, when you have something new and uncertain, the instinctive human response is to stay away from it, right? Whether it's like an actual case of alarm where there's, you know, a threat to them, you know, or just there's a new book in the store. I'll stick with what I know. But there's actually, do you mind if I answer? There's a pretty good question in the thread here, in the comment here. Do you mind if I?
Yep.
RBT asks, was Philip Jose Farmer's Wold Newton stuff an inspiration or something you looked at for the Ascension Epoch? Not directly. I mean, I have read some Wold Newton stuff. Yeah. So, but I won't say that was formative in me. But certainly the Wold Newton universe is another excellent example of collaborative world building from some stuff that's in the public domain. But the Wold Newton stuff also uses stuff that isn't fully in the public domain, or isn't, or at least wasn't at the time. For instance, Doc Savage is an important part of the Wold Newton universe, and I would love to use Doc Savage and some other characters like that. But they're still under copyright, so we don't. Yeah, it was I would say a spiritual inspiration, but it was not something. It's not it's not a derivation of that. And I wasn't reading it directly, but there is some very good stuff in there for sure.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, there's a lot of great comments here in the comment section, bringing up some good points. And I think you guys, you really hit a lot of the great points on this, and it's interesting because say somebody was to bring up that criticism, I feel like almost like an apologetic like approach, like I would almost ask them, well, what original thing do you like that you're into? And then once they mention, Batman, Superman, whatever it is, I'll be like, okay, did you know, that Batman was from this, and this? And so like everything that we think is original has roots in other things, no matter, whether they're deriving that directly from public domain material, or they're actually, it's a cycle, like the evolution of like kind of creating things. People, I think people are maybe a little bit ignorant of the creative process sometimes. And there is a evolution. Some people call like the zeitgeist or whatever, things like that. Like there's a certain awareness of our environment, and if you're creative, you're digging into a lot of different things as well, and you can't help but kind of siphon from all those things. It's pretty much actually impossible. And I'm glad you brought up Ecclesiastes too, because that's pretty much the first place my brain goes to when I hear that kind of argument. Now, speaking about more, like, I'm curious about kind of the practical side of working with public domain characters as well. You guys have done that for a while now, and I've definitely thought about dipping, into that kind of thing. And I know a lot of other creators have. What would you say is maybe some of the practical things as far as like how do you think one should approach doing that? Is there anything to look out for? Anything to try to maybe something that you learned maybe the hard way that you could kind of pass on to us?
One thing I would, besides like legal stuff of like, is this character in the public domain or not? Because the law can get very convoluted. So I can touch on that just briefly, that, in the United States right now, I think it's everything from 1924, from the end of 1924, I think, is definitely in the public domain. Absolutely. Everything before that time. But also there's a lot of stuff in there that was in the public domain on first print because they didn't print the copyright statement right, or in the right place, or they didn't print it at all, or it wasn't renewed. Back then you had to renew it more often, even until like the 1970s. That's why there's comic books from the 1940s that are in the public domain, including stuff that is used by Marvel and DC. But you would have to so possibly be careful of that. I mean, odds are major studios are very litigious, but also like you have to be making money somehow, usually, not for them to win in court, but for them to even bother, right? You have to come to their attention. So I don't know how important that is. But I think that the bigger thing is there is a temptation as a creator, especially if you just want to tell a story, is to just take something that already exists and just drop it in. And that may be fine if the character is really good. But I would caution that the reason that a lot of these characters, especially the newer ones from the 30s and 40s, are in the public domain is because they were failures. They were publication failures. Like they were super, like take the superheroes, some of which I think are very cool and interesting characters, and I would put up against any of the modern Marvel and DC characters. But the truth is that their comics failed. They weren't popular, and there's probably some reason for that. So you could do some sprucing up a bit, something to make them a bit more interesting. I think a good example of that is Dynamite's Project Superpowers series, where they took like a load of public domain superhero characters and put them in a different setting. It added some more drama and some interrelationships to them, and frankly, a lot of them are more interesting than the original comics. Like you can go, as you mentioned before, Marsh, that you can go on to various websites and read the original scans if someone has these comics from the 1940s, and a lot of them are very flat. But the truth is also that a lot of Batman and Superman, even Captain America comics and stuff from that era are kind of they're not very good either. But anyway, those characters that I just mentioned, they caught on and people renewed their copyright because something else worked in them. Whereas things like I don't know, the Flame or Hydro Man, for whatever reason, although I think Hydro Man's comics are actually some of the few that are actually very good. They didn't catch on for whatever reason. So that's something I think you should look out for and consider that, maybe these characters that you want to use, why do you want to use them and how are you going to make them more interesting?
I think a point to make is that, obviously everyone thinks of like, when did comics get really good? And part of that was Stan Lee bringing out the Fantastic Four. And his whole thing was to give characters full backstories, interpersonal relationships, have them play off each other and give them big personalities and, and make them more human. Peter Parker was always broke, and make them relatable. And a lot of especially the comic book characters that are in the public domain from the 30s and 40s, they don't have that flair. And a lot of times you could even like create something great just by looking at those old comics and saying, well, how can I give this character a personality? Who's his backstory? A lot of time they don't have a large cast of characters or anything like that. They don't play off anything. One of the reasons I always say Hydro Man, because that's my favorites, but he has a big personality and he has a very small but group of villains and stuff like that. So he has some of the stuff that would later Stan Lee would make standard in a comic story.
That's a good point. Yeah, I think it's interesting because like you were saying, there's kind of like how they kind of fall flat and a lot of these characters like there'll be a certain thing, but there's no explanation of why they're that way, or it's almost like even like the power or whatever that even the name of the character like says it's going to be isn't even part of the character in any way, shape, or form. Or like there's so many things like that. So there's a lot of kind of fodder to be developed, that I think is pretty cool. Also, like I said, I did want to kind of go into this tangent because it's all very much related with the fact that you guys have decided to, and let me know if it's the case of the whole thing. Is it everything you guys have put out is pretty much Creative Commons, or?
It's everything that's Ascension Epoch related. So if it uses the Ascension Epoch characters, then yeah, it's a Creative Commons attribution share alike.
Okay. Well, so what went into the decision of making that choice?
It was a long argument between Shell and I because initially she didn't want to do it, and
there was a lot of staying up at night.
Yeah.
We figured that out before we got married, so that was not a marriage argument.
Did we? Okay.
Yes, we did.
Okay. We've been married 9 years now, so it's hard to think back that long.
It was even before we were engaged.
Okay. All right. Well, so we did figure it out. But I'm anti-copyright. I don't think copyright is, certainly as it exists today, but even in principle, I don't think it makes sense to say. So I'm a free market libertarian. I'm an anarchist, right? So I have very particular ideas of what it means to have property, and I'm pro property, physical property, because it's rivalrous. I am anti the idea of putting a restricted ownership on something that's non-rivalrous, like an idea or an expression. Because if I write a story and I sell it to you in a book, a physical book under current law, you can take and resell that book or rent it or whatever, like a library does, or a video store. But the idea is like, oh, you can't print it, or you can't copy it and print it. It's like, well, why not? Now I know the reasoning behind it, but it doesn't make sense to say that you've actually taken my real physical property right in this physical book that actually exists in reality, and there's only so many books that can exist, and you can deprive that right based on today of this that you have control over an idea. That once you say an idea, everybody has it, right? And probably you didn't come up with the idea, as we were talking about before. You're not the original guy who ever thought of a guy who wears tights and a cape and punches people, right? So there's that aspect of it. And just as a, I was more dogmatic about it now back then than I am now. Frankly, I'd be happy if we just went back to like the original copyright time now of like 14 years, and then I wouldn't care about it anymore because it wouldn't be a big deal. But it also bothered me a lot that we saw in 1999 the Mickey Mouse Protection Act, the Sonny Bono Term Copyright Extension Act, which basically nuked the public domain for 20 years, where Congress passed the law. It passed the it passed court review, but I don't consider it constitutional. That they basically said we're going to extend the everything that's currently in copyright will stay in copyright for 20 years, and that only ended in January 1st, 2019. So now we've had a couple years in where new things have entered the public domain, but for a long and that was done specifically to protect characters owned by Walt Disney Corporation, because Mickey Mouse was coming up on would have if that law didn't pass, would now be in the public domain. A lot of things would now be in the public domain.
The original Godzilla would have been in the public domain.
Wow.
Yep.
But it blocked everything, and all for the sake of Mickey Mouse.
Superman, Batman, Captain America, all of those things would have been in the public domain. And that bothered me because it's like, you've already had it for 70 years, right? And if you're not content with your monopoly over that time, and now you want to extend it into infinity. So that was animating me. But also there was a sense that, since I really liked a lot of these stories from like Kipling and Jules Verne and Lovecraft to Edgar Rice Burroughs, Arthur Machen, I could go on all day, but nobody owned them anymore, right? So I thought I wanted to do the same thing and allow. I thought it would be wrong to claim, a restriction on how other people could enjoy this. Also, part of it was, frankly, I thought it would be a good marketing tool. And I thought, people will be interested in this because they can develop it on their own and write their own stuff. As a marketing tool, nobody cares about Creative Commons. We talked about this with Kim Holm, that if you're having any thought that people will really latch onto this thing because it's open source, they won't. But I think it's worth doing anyway.
Well, that's interesting because, I think that aspect won't propel your property to, the stars necessarily, but it is an attractive feature. When I go onto your site and I read your stuff as Creative Commons, I'm immediately thinking, as a creator, like, this might be kind of fun to play around with some of their stuff. But I think the popularity of something, if your stuff was X-Men, or something like, and it got to that kind of popularity, it would be on the merits of what you've created and your marketing and whatever it is that got you to get the attention, and it's, yeah, it's not going to be because of Creative Commons, but that sure as heck couldn't hurt it, I would think. Well, there's actually a bunch of different things. So I guess because there's so many different directions to go, but I guess where I'll go, because I think it's interesting that you said that you're very much pro free market, yet it seems like maybe there's a little bit of contradiction in the fact that you want to work with the Creative Commons, because one of the things that copy is good with copyright and has to do with free market is the fact that you can license this and you can split up your intellectual property in a million different ways. And potentially, I mean, it all hinges on how popular your stuff is and if anybody cares, but like, if you can get that attention, you can split the pie up in a lot of different ways. And there you go. You got a booming business, is that, what do you think about kind of that, I guess, dichotomy or whatever?
Go ahead, Sean.
I'll take that one because that was what kept me up at night. When Mike said he wanted to do this Creative Commons or he didn't want to do it at all, that was a big decision for me and a big step. And I kind of had to get, like, I had to think about this for the first time. And the biggest question we always get is if everyone can pirate all your books and anyone can take your characters and make new books and use them in anything like that. I mean, they are share alike, so that's a restriction in some ways. Because if you use our stuff, you also have to release it under the same license. So Disney couldn't make an Ascension Epoch movie and copyright it. They'd have to release it, and people would have to be able to build on it the same way they do with ours. Mm-hmm. And they would, like, if people took it to the internet and started making copies of the movie and downloading it left and right, they'd have to let them. So people are like, well, how are you going to make money? Because we get this idea that if you don't copyright it, you're not going to make any money. And that everyone's going to run away with your ideas. But the fact of the matter is really, copyright mainly protects people who have the money to defend themselves. If you came out and you said, actually, I knew someone when I worked at a grocery store that's like, I came up with Stitch from Lilo and Stitch. I have that entire concept. Little blue alien comes down from the sky, thinks he's a dog, all of that. I can tell you they didn't take that to Disney because they can't sue the pants off Disney. You have to have the lawyers and the court costs and the fees and millions of dollars to fight this stuff. So really right now, especially, copyright protects large companies.
Yeah. Go ahead.
I was going to say, Marvel owns all the characters created by Stan Lee and Jack Kirby and Steve Ditko. Marvel and now Disney had nothing to do with creating Marvel was part of the company, but when Disney bought it, Disney had nothing to do with creating any of those characters, but they're Disney characters now. Whereas Jack Kirby lost a lot of money and couldn't get his pages back. And, how does that help the creator? So there's that aspect of it. And the other aspect of it is that, especially if you read Mike's stuff, and when we first started doing Ascension Epoch, I was not the absolute best artist in the world. I'm a better artist now. People like my artwork. If you read especially the Martian War stuff, Mike mimics that old writing style, but cleans it up in such a way that you'd have a hard time finding someone that could write the way Mike writes. And people that know our characters. But truly, there's a difference between a Fantastic Four story written by Stan Lee and a Fantastic Four story written by Warren Ellis. They're two completely different flavors. And if you like the original Fantastic Four, you like Stan Lee's writing, you're still the creator. Even if you had to move to a model where, you did Kickstarters and you say, well, all right, everyone's pirating my books, but I'm not going to write the next one, which you totally want to read because you're a fan. until I make X amount of money. Like, we have the ability to do that now. So even in an absolute worst case scenario, you still have the promise of new things to get you money. And the more popular it gets by people spreading it around and pirating, the more it's doing free marketing for you. The hardest part is getting people to look at you. And just for the record, we've never had anyone, come to us at a con, and we tell people like this, you can go download this for free. It's fine. You can share it all around.
What we don't like ourselves put out the link to download it for free. Usually, sometimes we do, like on our website, heroicadventurefiction.com. We've begun serializing all 6 of our books. And eventually the ones that we have out so far will be on there for free to read if you want to page through and read it on your computer, right? But in theory, we don't block anyone who bought our book and wanted to make a PDF of it and put it out there to download on a torrent or something. But yeah, the point I really want to zero in on and what Shell said is that copyright doesn't make you rich. If you're already rich, copyright helps you stay rich and get richer. But the thing that any kind of independent artist, any kind of an up and coming person, any kind of a person who's trying to create something new, the problem they have is getting people to know about them. It's not, is somebody going to steal my idea, right? Or because we could talk about there's all kinds of obstacles to actually doing that. But even aside from the law, the bigger problem is that nobody knows who you are. Nobody cares what you're selling, right? And you have to work on that at the expense of almost everything else aside from just creating it. And I'll be honest, we're not making a living on our books. I'm a software developer. And if I wasn't, we would starve, right? So it's not like we've hit the jackpot here, but it's true. And we've talked to so many people. We've been into writing groups and like art collectives and stuff in a local area, and a lot of them they're so defensive and like they don't even want to show people in the group like their works in progress and stuff, like because someone might steal it. Is like that's the least of your worries. Like the best thing that could happen to us is that Disney could make an Ascension Epoch ripoff, right? And claim that they don't, they're going to copyright it anyway, and it's not based on our stuff, so they don't have to follow like the Creative Commons stuff, because it would blow up in controversy. Millions more people would know about us, and they would buy our books. So, would it bother me if Disney did that? Excuse me, maybe a little bit. But I would be much richer because of it. Simply, more people would know about it. More people would be inclined to seek us out.
My thing that I was going to finish on was that no one's ever said like, "Hey, I could just find a copy of your book. I don't have to give you money for it." Like, people want to support what we're doing. We've never not sold a book because we were Creative Commons.
Yeah.
Yeah, we've gone to a lot of cons, and people will ask what it is, and nobody ever is like, "Oh, that's okay, I can get it on the internet." Nobody ever does that. In fact, if you think about, I'm not saying it's right or that you should, but like most people have pirated stuff. How many people who pirate download movies or music never buy any movies? Like, they never go to the movies, they never buy a DVD, they never buy music. That almost never happens. I buy even though I have a preference for reading books from like out of copyright stuff that's in the public domain. And normally you can get that stuff for free. You can go on Project Gutenberg and read it there. But out of convenience, I will sometimes pay money for it on the Kindle if there's not a good free Kindle copy that's formatted well and that has like the original illustrations in. I'll pay $3 even though I can get it for free. So I think for most people, that's really not a problem. Even the fact that you can still go out now and buy books in the store, if there's any stores open where you are. But you can buy a copy of Under the Moons of Mars or 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea for $10 now. I mean, why would you do that? You can get it for free because there's all kinds of reasons. It's convenient. You like the format. This is a new annotated edition. You can do all kinds of stuff with that. And I don't think copyright is not lack of copyright is not what's keeping people, especially indie creators, from making money.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a lot of great points. That's the thing is, if something gets attention, there's really it's kind of like a forest fire or something. Like there's if something catches fire in a forest, like it's really hard to stop it. Whether you have copyright or it's Creative Commons, the stuff is going to be stolen, used, remixed, whatever. And sometimes you're going to benefit from that. Sometimes you're not, but even when you're not, you kind of are, just because of like the marketing side of things. And I think it's interesting too, because it kind of takes, the it takes like the power away from the fear of putting your stuff on, Facebook, where, there's all kinds of things where apparently they own the stuff that you post and stuff, and like a lot of other like websites, just putting this stuff out there. Well, if your stuff is Creative Commons, it's like, well, you're kind of taking any of the power out of that. I think with that, is there now, I don't know, I haven't seen the answer to this yet, but is it possible to license something even if you have it under Creative Commons? It kind of seems like probably not, right?
I would say yes, because it's not like a surrender of your rights. It's a grant. Like, for instance, take the Disney scenario. Disney wants to make or any kind of Hollywood studio. No Hollywood studio would ever make a movie and release it under Creative Commons. I think that's a pretty safe bet. There's, for instance, if they wanted to make a movie after dark, they would have the Adventures of Torrent, Corona, and everything. They would have to release under the terms of Creative Commons. They'd have to make it available for anyone else to make derivative works off of. To, once they got it, distribute it for free if they wanted to and share it with people. No Hollywood studio would ever want to do that. It's against their nature, right? I think I'm fairly confident they would never agree to those terms. So what they might do instead is they would come to us and reach a different agreement and say, listen, we want to do our own thing, but we want to copyright it. And they may wave a large wad of cash under my nose, and I may even agree to this thing, right? But, that, as far as I'm concerned, like you do not relinquish your rights to release it to other people under a different license. But you're saying if you don't otherwise have an agreement, you can use the Creative Commons license. But if there was a different agreement, yeah, you could use that. I mean, that's certainly my interpretation of it. And I'm not saying I would do that, but I'm also not saying that, if a large wad of cash was waved under my nose, that I wouldn't.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I don't think anybody would blame you either. Yeah, that's interesting. So basically, you have it under Creative Commons. Say Disney wanted to buy it up and make their own movie. Well, they're kind of they're purchasing. They would probably purchase the right to make it a copyright, like you were saying, for the movie purposes. But you still own. Well, I don't know. Do you own it? You still have created this other stuff under Creative Commons, so they would only have still kind of the movie rights, I guess, in that scenario.
Yeah, typically, I mean, licensing agreements are very strict and they narrowly defined. And like, I have the action figure rights, I have the coloring book rights, or whatever. Yeah. I mean, any kind of legal contract is only as good as the person who writes it, I guess, and the lawyers who argue it. But yeah, I would take that tact with it. Although, I don't expect anybody to try and license our stuff.
The thing where you'd have, I don't want to call it an issue because it's still the other thing to keep in mind is that with a lot of licensing, it's trying to keep a large company going. So like, I don't know under Creative Commons that we could do something like if you created new art, you could say like, well, this is an exclusive t-shirt design because I copyrighted this particular piece. We really wouldn't want to get into that with the Ascension Epoch because our ethos is kind of like, well, if it's Ascension Epoch, you could use it. So I don't do like separate copyrighted pieces of artwork, but if I really wanted to, I could make a brand new drawing of Corona and say, this particular one's copyrighted and I'm giving it to this particular place for shirt licensing. But, we couldn't do something like, oh, well, this one company has the exclusive rights to make all Ascension Epoch shirts, because that wouldn't work. That goes against what Creative Commons does. But the other thing to look at is that every time someone puts an Ascension Epoch character on a shirt, they have to put the link to ascensionepoch.com. They have to say, if I'm that Mike and I are the creators. So that's free advertising. And Mike and I don't have $1 million to spend on advertising. And we only need one family's worth of money, whereas, Disney has to pay their marketers, their designers, their story writers, the, HR people, the caterers. That's a lot of money you have to make, and that's licensing is very, very important to them. But we just need to eke out a meager living. If we make, enough to cover our mortgage and our grocery bills and have some left over to, enjoy life, we're good.
Yeah, so. I think people get too caught up in this idea of like, oh, the big companies and what can I do against the big companies? Well, maybe in a legal battle, maybe you're able to buy fewer politicians, right? Of course, but the truth is that in the creative area, in the ability to sell and react to changes in the market, small businesses and individual creators are much better suited to survive than these large dinosaur corporate entities that are wrapped up in these. Look at Walt Disney Corporation right now. Are they doing well right now? Absolutely not. Theaters are shut down. The park shut down. Even if they weren't shut down, a lot of people aren't going to go out to them anymore because they're afraid. And they're tied into this business model. They can't really break free of that business model. They are trying to with the Disney Plus and everything, but they're they don't know how to. They haven't played in that space, and you see this in every kind of economic downturn. You've seen this actually that back to the 1890, the supposed Gilded Age, when all the birth of these trusts and monopolies that actually before laws came in under the guise of controlling the monopolies, but that were actually there to help the monopolies suppress smaller competition, that the competitors were able to really threaten them, especially in times of economic disturbance. And that's, I think, so the small creators, small businesses are better, or they're more adaptable. They have less cash on hand, right? But they don't have these huge anchors tied around them. That while, a large corporation, sometimes that anchor floats, but then eventually it runs out of buoyancy and it drags you down. Whereas that small parties don't have that. And that's actually an advantage.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. Makes me think of, there's a book by Malcolm Gladwell. I think it's called David and Goliath or something. I don't know. It has to do with the whole David and Goliath idea. And it's the same type of thing where it's like yes, these big corporations are huge. They have a lot of power, but there's a lot of things that they can't do that you can actually do because they can't move freely like we can move. We don't have as many strings attached to us and things holding us back. At the same time, they have the attention. So that's what we have to fight for, is that attention, We have a question here, which I think is pretty cool, from Judd Goswick. And I'm trying to put it up here. There we go. Will Dauntless accept submissions in the future issues?
I think we're definitely open to that. Theoretically, right now, so Dauntless is our zine that I mentioned, the heroic adventure zine, and the idea for the most part is that it's sort of geared towards the Ascension Epoch. It doesn't have to be. It's actually for the whole genre. And I have some ideas of non-Ascension Epoch things that I would like to include in future issues down the line. And I'm definitely open to submissions. It would not have to be Ascension Epoch related. It could be other stuff. If the popularity catches on, I would probably like to expand it. And by expanded, it could either be more regular, like every month or every other month instead of every quarter, which is the plan now, or it could be larger. Excuse me. Obviously, there's certain if you're making it a zine where you're printing it by hand and folding it and stapling it, there's certain limitations on the size that it can be. So we don't know how much bigger I could make an issue, but yeah, it's something I would consider. And I would say that anyone who is interested in submitting stuff to there, and I would pay for submissions. I'm not being put on the spot here. I don't really know what I would pay for it. But yeah, I one thing that's important to me is that we always pay people, even if it's if we can make use of their stuff, even if it's like Creative Commons, like I want to compensate Kim Holm for his work, even though we don't have to. I think it's the right thing to do. So I think even for that's the other thing, is that Dauntless itself is released Creative Commons, so you would have to be okay with releasing your stuff Creative Commons as well. But yeah, I would certainly consider that.
Awesome.
I think on the end of the larger Ascension Epoch on the whole, it's Creative Commons. We invite other people to use it. But as far as Ascension Epoch goes, we have essentially what's canon and what's canon and non-canon. Like anyone can make an Ascension Epoch story and use our characters and stuff like that. But it may not fit into the, like, if someone makes an entirely different, like if Torrent has different powers or something, you could totally do that. Or if he uses his powers in a way he can't, then it can't be melded into the real like canon universe, but you could still make a story of it.
Well, everybody has their own canon. I mean,
right.
I don't accept the current Star Wars canon, like many millions of other fans, right? So what I would say, our canon is the stuff that we write. And it's possible that if other people would write stuff, we may say, oh yeah, that's part of our canon too. We accept that actually happened in the universe. But I don't think any reader is obligated to accept. Maybe the next book we put out, somebody who's like, I don't like that didn't happen, but I really like the rest of the stuff. That's no skin off my back. And I think, we have a certain prerogative as creators to say this is our universe as we see it, but you as the customer don't have to see it that way. I mean, if like, as far as I'm concerned, there hasn't been a Marvel comic published after 2006 or so. I don't know. So I pretend those things don't exist, and I think that's the way forward for a lot of. I think that's the way forward to have peace amongst fandom, is to accept the headcanon.
I agree with that entirely. I was just saying from the point of view where people are like, well, how do you add to this? That's kind of how it's.
Yep.
It's like it either fits in or it doesn't, but it's cool either way.
Right. That's cool. It's really cool. I'm intrigued by this whole using public domain characters, and even the idea of releasing things under Creative Commons. It's a kind of a hard decision to make, but some of the things you said here almost make it less hard, because a lot of the things that it seems would be a disadvantage are actually not really that much of a disadvantage. Like you said, unless you're a big corporation. There is a lot of money in licensing. I think a lot of people don't realize that that's how a lot of people make money. Even people who are not very well known, they find ways to do that with different things, not even just comics and stuff. I hear a lot of people doing stuff with music, with licensing and things like that. So, to turn off that opportunity, it really depends on what your goals are, but if you're trying to make a comic, like a lot of the people in my audience, you're trying to make a comic and you want eyeballs on it, you want to put your story out there and people to get into it, I think there's nothing wrong with the Creative Commons option. I think it's definitely a possibly very good option. And I think the other way through copyright is also good too. I think you can kind of flex both ways depending on what your goals are and stuff.
I was just going to say, Mike and I do attribution share alike. We don't restrict people on creating non-derivative, or we don't restrict people on creating derivative works or using our characters and other stuff. But it's worth mentioning that there are different Creative Commons licenses, and you should look at all of them, because like XKCD is non-commercial, non-derivative, which means people can share it and share it and share it and share it, but they
couldn't put it on a T-shirt, for instance, and sell it, so they would retain rights to sell something for profit. In that case, that's the non-commercial.
So you could just make it free to share, but not free to use for commercial purposes. That would retain the licensing, essentially.
That makes sense. Interesting. Yeah, no, I did know that there was different Creative Commons. So yeah, there's a lot to explore there. So that all being said, I would just want to encourage everybody to definitely go over to the links in the description. There's a lot of good stuff there. The Ascension Epoch website is really cool. There's just so many stories. You can get a good taste of all the stuff that they're doing over there. And then obviously the Kickstarter, please, go help the Kickstarter, get some more legs going, and it's already doing pretty well, I think. And I'm looking forward to getting the stories and stuff and getting the zine and all that. So, definitely go check that out. Thank you guys for coming on. I think this was a really cool discussion.
Thank you for
having us.
Yeah, absolutely. Is there any other things you would like to shout out before we leave?
I'm going to say Kim Holm did help with our site a lot. So, but I can't pronounce his website. So you just have to search
Den Ungher Holm dot something. Anyway, he was on your channel before. So, you can look, if you look up Kim Holm art, I think it takes you through his one of his platforms. But I would like to give a shout out to all the people who backed us on Kickstarter. It's hugely flattering. We've been selling books since 2014. We've published 6 of them, and we've gone to cons and stuff. And it's always nice when people you don't know come up to you. So I want to thank people that do know us and supported us, and I wanted to keep buying more Ascension Epoch stuff, and also a lot of people who, frankly, we don't know, we've never met before, and I think that's awesome that you're going to take a chance on something new. And the performance of the Kickstarter has been great so far, and I hope some more viewers will check it out, and if you like it, back us. But thank you to our supporters.
Absolutely, and hopefully we can get to some more stretch goals and things like that as well.
I think we're $5 away from another stretch goal, or at least we were going to be before I checked.
What's in the stretch goal for the reward?
The next one is art prints, glossy 4x6 prints of art done by color ones done by Shell Presto. The book itself will be black and white, but she did stuff in watercolor that looks very nice. So
awesome. That'll be really cool. And lastly, I would also say, please click on those links to the YouTube channels, because they both YouTube channels have some really cool discussions, just like we had just now. A lot of really interesting stuff there. I've definitely spent some time on those, so definitely go over there, subscribe, and check that stuff out. Other than that, once again, thank you everybody in the chat for hanging out with us. Thank you everybody watching on the replay. And thank you, Shell and Mike, for coming on once again. And that will be it for this episode.
Thanks.
All right. Later, everybody.
All right.